Welcome back to Base Camp for our fourth installment of Talent Summit series. This week we're going to examine pride and purpose, and I think it's fair to say the lines between work, family, and society have meshed and morphed a lot in recent weeks. And the work type and workforce that we value has come sharply into focus, asking the question of us all, what is it that we stand for? And I'm often reminded of not just frontline workers who are highly skilled and lowly paid and quite deservingly should get and should be much more valued in society, and also those delivery workers in many ways who have been described as being precarious are now being titled as being essential workers. And then the other thing that I'm reminded of daily is with the amount of dodgy haircuts I see, that barbers should really be categorized as essential workers. Welcome to everyone from all locations. We've people from over 25 countries around the world tuning in. You're all warmly welcome. Joining us this week is our good friend, Bob Gibbs, who's Associate Administrator from NASA. Tuning in from DC, Bob will speak about how NASA's enduring purpose and global collaboration has led to this week the historic launch that yesterday was postponed, which we will cover, and how the values led to the decision to push that launch back yesterday, the first human launch on US soil for over a decade. Welcome, Bob.
Sorry for the delay. Thank
All
you,
good.
Robbie. Very glad to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. So I was nearly going to ring Houston. Probably the problem there, Bob. The first of many. Also looking at how to reclaim our why. Joining us from Montreal, Heath Slaughter is an igniter with Simon Sinek Inc. and a global thought leader on where influence, trust, and leadership intersect. Welcome, Heath.
Thank you so much for having me. Looking also forward to the conversation today. Thank you. And welcome everyone from around the world.
Thanks, Heath. And to explore pride and purpose and what that means from a leadership perspective and for teaming, I'm joined by Rory Best, a legendary Irish rugby captain, to tap into his 14 years experience, his 124 caps, his 63% success rate in leading Ireland out onto the pitch for 38 games, which led Ireland to a string of historic achievements, including our first win against South Africa, our first two wins against New Zealand, a Grand Slam in Twickenham, which saw Ireland climb to be the #1 ranked side in world rugby, and most recently, the third most productive best on the family farm of the three working there. Welcome, Rory.
Thank you very much. Quite an introduction.
I haven't finished yet. I'll come back to it. I think we've just dropped Heath. We'll zoom him in 2 secs. Bob, I'll begin with you, if I may. You joined us last year at Talent Summit, and I don't know if you remember, you actually produced this document on stage. It was a falsified letter to regret my application for an astronaut position. And later that evening, over dinner, later on that evening, you also turned around to Julia, who's really the muscle and the brains behind Talent Summit, and you told her you had something for her as well. I was expecting another letter of rejection on nice NASA-headed paper to emerge. You put out your business card and you gave it to her. So what's the deal with falsifying my application and trying to headhunt her staff?
Yeah. So just so you know, we selected our next astronaut class. We're in the process of doing it. And regretfully, Robbie, once again, you were unable to measure up to the standards that we have set at NASA. I'm informing you now that regretfully, again, you have been unsuccessful in your attempt to join the astronaut corps. And I think it's more than obvious to anyone who's ever met Julie and worked with her that they understand where the brains of this organization truly lie. So I think those two things remain constant.
For sure. Just keep your hands off her. Bob, good to see you. Looking at the rich history in NASA in making the impossible possible, how do you think your purpose has enabled your response, say, to the COVID crisis or to what you guys have gone through in the last number of weeks, and probably moving somewhat from a mission-driven organization to a people-driven organization? And what of your values was tested most?
I think, you know, to dismiss the elephant in the room, yesterday's launch was a great demonstration of our values, or the postponement of yesterday's launch. If you really want to test your commitment to purpose, to your why, to the things you find important, do it with the whole world watching. Do it when a lot of your country's leadership is there on site with you, and something you've worked very hard for 10 years is on the line. If you really want to test and find out your commitment to value and to purpose, in this case, to safety, do it then. You know, do it with the world watching. And I think we did. I honestly see yesterday's postponement as a success story in a lot of ways from a leadership perspective. We were willing to walk our values. We were willing to stand behind the talk that we always have about safety and people first. You know, within my organization, the Mission Support Directorate, you know, we always talk about mission first, but people always. You know, you have to remember what makes us different, what drives our purpose, our people. You know, when you're talking specifically about COVID-19, you know, we always, I think last time we talked about work from anywhere when we were together. Well, as you can see, I'm working from my wood shop in my house, or on the road, or in the office, or at one of the centers. We work from anywhere, you know. That is a principle that we adhere to right now. But leaning in and for the benefit of others, another one of our values, you know, we developed a ventilator in 5 days. 2 employees said, hey, you know what, we can build a positive pressure ventilator that we can mass produce to help take some of the pressure off the American healthcare system. So employees at JPL developed the ventilator. Within 5 days, it was in testing within 30, and it was already ready to be produced. We developed ways to, using the technology we've developed at NASA, you know, we were looking at ways to disinfect large volume spaces, whether it be hospital rooms or ambulances, and we've come up with a process for doing that using some of those technologies. We had, you know, we started a challenge amongst our workforce where in a little over a week, we had over 400 ideas to help with COVID-19 response, which were eventually down selected to a handful that are now being pursued, not only in the public space, but in the private industry as well. So there's lots of examples of us living our values through the COVID-19 response. But I think, you know, what set NASA apart or ahead, however you want to say that, was the principle of work from anywhere, and we'd already been living and experiencing that.
Nice. And I remember when we were last together, we were talking about remote working, and somebody was with us. They'd worked for us up by where you are, Rory, and they said, "Oh yeah, we've a really highly remote workforce, you know." So Bob just said, "Look, lads, we've got people on the International Space Station. I think we win hands down." So I take that point. When we talk about purpose, Heath and I spoke about it, and just how long it's been a concept, and it's something we need to remind ourselves of constantly. But the one story that's often brought up is the famous story of JFK walking in NASA and seeing the janitor and asking the janitor, "What is it you do?" And he says, "Well, I help put people on the moon." With such a lofty purpose of enhancing humankind, Bob, how do you ground that in a practical way with like 18,000 plus employees every day?
Yeah, I think it has to be something that says commitment starts with leadership. You know, from the very beginning to the very end, everyone has a role at NASA, and we're all pulling on the rope in the same direction. You know, we're all aimed at that goal of trying to get the first woman, the next man to the moon by 2024. And everyone has a voice. You know, I think we have very strong processes and practices which values the individual, which values every person that has to come to work in a very specific way. We recognize that they're people and they're bringing themselves to work, and to get the best from our folks, which we absolutely, positively must have, The science is too demanding. Failure options, when you're talking about exploration, some other things are too dramatic to not get the best from everyone for us to accomplish our mission. But I think it starts, with the employees' engagement, commitment to the mission, and then leadership honoring and respecting their employees.
Nice. We'll come back to some of that and we'll tease it out a little bit further in a while. Thanks, Bob. Heath, good to see you. And thanks a million for the spirit in which you've engaged with us. It's been really, really impressive, and I appreciate you joining us from Canada. You speak, Heath, about the golden circle principles, and Simon Sinek speaks about it also. Just briefly, what are they, and where have you seen them brought to life best, most recently, since the COVID crisis?
Well, you are absolutely right. The golden circle, the principle, it's an idea that Simon himself discovered about 10 or 15 years ago. And then, of course, the book Start With Why came out. I think we're in the 10th or 11th anniversary this year. And the premises or the simple idea is that we operate on three levels. There's what we do, there's how we do it, and there's why we do it. And the clarity of the why, the clarity of that purpose. And Bob was just speaking to this, I didn't even know about the ventilators and the disinfection. So I would say that's a great example of an organization pivoting and living its why, even while it can't do some of the other things that it was used to doing before. And so the clarity of the why, back to the golden circle, it's the clarity of the why that distinguishes the most successful, the most innovative, the most imaginative, and perhaps the most enduring organizations from everybody else. And this also applies to individuals. The most successful and inspiring leaders are the ones who have a clear sense of their why. And I just brought this little sort of image right here. It's a little backwards, so you probably can't see it, but just imagine three circles: the what, the how, and the why. The most inspiring leaders, they communicate from the inside out. And it is those organizations, those institutions, those individuals that we choose to follow because we believe what they believe. And so in terms of examples, some of the things that we've been seeing, local examples, I think in every single person's community, there is a restaurant that has pivoted to, a grocery, sort of a pop-up grocery store, or they've done some sort of like delivery that they weren't doing before. And so you see, certain organizations, gyms have now pivoted to go online because gyms are not in the business of equipment. They're in the business of helping people become healthier, get fitter. And so in the United States, there's a great organization called Barry's Boot Camp. They used to have to go to Barry's to train. Now they're doing it online. They're doing it virtually. They have classes, and they have sometimes hundreds, if not thousands of people tuning in at any one time. Peloton is another example of the same thing. You see not just restaurants and gyms, but you see hotels in New York City, the Four Seasons, this luxury brand. Their why is to create memorable experiences, to make people feel special, to give them a home. What have they pivoted to? They've pivoted to providing housing for medical professionals, for the frontline medical professionals, because they can't go home, because if they go home, they're going to infect or potentially infect their other family members. So the Four Seasons is housing medical professionals. So I think some of these are great examples of organizations that have pivoted. You hear about Google and Microsoft and even Unilever trying to figure out ways, how can we be sustainable even through COVID, even through the coronavirus? And then there's also a lot of examples, B Corps, like Lisa, they're a mattress company. Okay, what's a mattress company? Well, their why is to make good in the world. And so they figured out a way, how can we build mattresses quickly? Just as Bob and NASA was trying to figure out how can we build those ventilators 2 days, 5 days, get them in production in 30 days. Lisa has figured out a way to design and build mattresses and produce them and get them into hospitals for patients who are suffering from COVID, who need to be a little bit elevated for their breathing. So I think we're seeing examples locally. I think we're seeing examples nationally, and I think we're seeing examples internationally, and they're all around us. And I think if we open up our eyes, we can see organizations are saying, you know what, I may not be able to do what I was doing before, but we can still live into our why and bring our purpose to life in other ways. Nice.
You remind me of a story now. The context is slightly different, but in Rathmines here in Dublin, not far from where I live, Heath, there was a pizza joint, and it was just opposite the Garda station, if people know that junction. And one night, a car drove through the traffic lights and drove through the front window. The next day, they erected hoarding and changed the signage, and they said, now doing drive-through. And I thought it was a good example of a pivot to deal with the context. For most of us, Heath, for most of us at the minute, it's really a question of survival. And when I think about what we're all focused on, we're talking to Rory about this a few moments ago, it's about the head down, the here and now, and getting through this. And we're not all NASA, which you respect, Bob, and we don't all have this enduring purpose. And there's a time for head up and there's a time for head down. How can we move in the short term to reclaim our purpose, or to connect what matters most now to something that's enduring?
Yeah. So, we have a process at Simon Sinek where we talk about the why discovery. And what's interesting about the why is it really is, we think of purpose and cause and belief and, what are we fighting for? The why is also an articulation of who we are when we are at our best in service to something bigger. So you think about NASA, that enduring mission to enhance life on planet Earth. You think about Google organizing all of the world's information. It's who we are, who they are when they are at their best. And we think of the why as an origin story. The why is usually something as an individual who is developed in our late teens or early 20s. It's an origin story. It is born from experience. And so one of the best ways to think about, reclaiming that why is thinking about, in the past, when have you been at your best? COVID or no COVID, coronavirus or no coronavirus? When has your organization, your institution, your community been at its best? And I think we've seen examples in the last few months. If you can remember a couple of months ago when the shelter in place began, you started to see people helping their neighbors. You started to see people reaching out to vulnerable people. I'm going to go get your groceries. These were all examples of who we are when we're at our best in service of something bigger. So I think it's really about looking, when have we been at our best, those moments, those peak moments, and how can we repeat those moments into the future?
Well said and well articulated, Heath. I think of the greater purpose. I think of sport, and I think of Ireland, and I think of when one person, Rory, was at his best. But let me come back, Rory, when you weren't at your best, if I may. Good to see you, Rory, by the way. How's Jodie and the kids?
Oh, they're all very good. Homeschooling, all of that, and I'm trying to stay out of their way.
And you're standing in as PE teacher, I believe.
Trying to, yeah. That's my contribution.
No better PE teacher. We last saw you, Rory, at Talent Summit in Dublin, where you were the recipient of the Dermot Costello Outstanding Leadership Award. And my colleague Adi, he asked you 5 questions about you. Do you remember what score you got out of 5?
Did I get 3?
No, and I'm going to add that one to the tally, so that's now 3 out of 6. You got 2 out of 5. And knowing that's what I was dealing with, I had to go and buy your book to get the fact. It's been a phenomenal read, and congratulations on it, and commiserations about the timing of it. But it's amazing. I haven't been able to put it down, Rory. And there's so many parallels and lessons for business in the book. I really found it fascinating and discovered a huge amount about you, in fact, and not in the way I expected. I felt I got to know you and what you stood for in many ways, and obviously having followed you and the Irish success over recent years, I was reading about the Lions experience, and I think listening to what Heath was saying there around that kind of that higher sense, and I think of missionary when I think of that, and that's very clear to me. When you put on the green shirt, you represent your country. The discretionary effort that drives is nearly missionary-like. And then when I see a Lions setup, Rory, you're taking the elite from 4 countries and you're putting them together for a short sprint. It's more like a mercenary. It seems more like a mercenary drive. Is the motivation different when you play for the Lions? And having captained them, how do you get the best of that disparate group in a short space of time?
I think the Lions really, probably in modern rugby, the tours of order pressures now. All your competitions are going longer, so it's becoming more dense, which is pressure to get to know. Ultimately, you get people behind them because your sense of there's a history, there's a tradition with the you want to be the best. You want to keep this in this sort of ultimately, as I said, it's not easy to do. So when you factor in all of that, that's the motivation. You're dealing with competitive players that want the best stage. So when trying to find the things that, and you have to, is that player.
Rory, just haven't said. I can't really hear you.
Okay.
Sorry, just try it there one more time.
Can you hear me now?
Better.
Yeah. So basically, there's a real. You have to keep the lines. The guys starting from countries, they're used to be players in for their country.
Rory, sorry, just coming and going there a little bit. Could you just take a quick look at your sound? I'll come back to you. We pick up on that in 2 minutes. Yeah, thanks a million, Rory. Bob, I'll come to you. I want to talk about collaboration, and I want to talk about teaming. The International Space Station is a world-class example of true global collaboration for the benefit of humankind, and its origin, unbeknown to me up to recently, was a collaboration between former enemies, in fact. So it was Japan, it was Russia, it was Canada, it was Europe, and the US coming together to collaborate. How did NASA begin to kind of shift that mindset of national competition to one of global collaboration in spite of all the economic climate?
Yeah, so I think it's a great example. I think, Robbie. When you really look at the collaboration as opposed to competition, although there is some of that as well. We have over 150 international partnerships, and we're working on the Artemis Accords to help govern principles right now of how space will be used for exploration going forward, and many, many other examples of things that we have to work on. I think it gets back to your why and your values and your purpose. Remember, one of the things of NASA, whether you're talking about human exploration, science, technology, or aeronautics, it's for the benefit of all. It's one of our core principles, and living those principles every day. We're doing remarkable things with the International Space Station and many other projects and programs throughout the agency. But it kind of has to start with, understanding and believing and behaving in accordance with those principles of for the benefit of all. I think it's a great example of what can be done when you cooperate and when you kind of, put some of the national boundaries down and look for the betterment of mankind, to improve the human condition, to do all of these things. It's a pretty neat thing. We've had folks living and working continuously for over 20 years on the International Space Station. And as we look to expand these partnerships to include commercial and others, I think it's a really neat thing that is it's a great demonstration of what can happen, what can be done when you put some of these other issues aside. I really couldn't hear Rory, earlier. Unfortunately, the audio's fading in and out, but I think he's also as an individual, a great example of, putting religion and region aside for a common purpose. I think that the achievements that he's been able to accomplish through sport are truly remarkable.
Thanks for that, Bob. And I'm reminded of collaboration and even looking at the context of this discussion, the world of work, and how the supply chain of talent is becoming much more disparate, and different ways of working, work type, workforce, location, remote, all being thrown into the melting pot right now, and how we look to reconvene would put a heightened focus on collaboration. And I think there's a huge amount of insights, say, into the way you guys look to collaborate. But if I look specifically and beyond the International Space Station, because I think it's symbolic in so many ways, into your own talent supply chain. And you guys pretty much had a monopoly in NASA up to about 20, 15 years ago with a number of private sector entrants, SpaceX, Virgin, and Blue Origin, and so on. And there was a race for talent within your sector, but you've also shifted from that kind of competition to now looking at your supply chain of talent to partner with them. And I think that resulted this week, I think, was it SpaceX, they made the craft to bring the NASA astronauts up to the International Space Station. How has that collaboration come about, and what does that mean to how you look to partner? And what can we learn as our supply chains of talent evolve as we recover, Bob?
I think what you were asking me, I have a little bit of trouble there with the stream. I think what you're asking me about, how did the collaboration come about? Well, it didn't happen overnight. You know, it took over 10 years of effort, of dedicated effort, of collaborating, of questioning how you do business and looking for a better way to do business. You know, it almost relates back to what we're going through today through COVID-19. And is it a question of really surviving? Or is it a questioning of leveraging these opportunities to learn something and move forward as an organization? I will tell you, I see it as an opportunity as we work through these issues to move NASA forward in how we work and the way we work and the things that we do. You know, any organization has the same opportunity today to kind of look at themselves and say, is there a better way to do business? You know, it's that restless reinvention principle. And I think for any of the folks in HR that are on this call or having this listening to this conversation, there's a great opportunity for you to look at the organizational structure and dynamics and see how people truly interact and how they work and how they relate and the things that they do. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be building a spacecraft to go to the moon and then the next one to get us beyond the moon and to Mars. You know, it could be anything, any product line, but it's an opportunity to really look how people, and it gets down to the people issue, how they interact. I think we discussed earlier that, you know, transformation is here for every organization. There's no question, at least from my perspective. But you always have to remember, while maybe an organizational purpose or goal, it happens on an individual basis. And everyone goes through this a little bit differently.
And say yesterday, for example, like in terms of the decision not to go ahead with the launch. So was that a joint decision between SpaceX and NASA? And how do you look to kind of form that purpose amongst competitors?
Yeah, it's an interesting organizational dynamic because it is competition on some level and it is collaboration. The decision yesterday, we can get into a little bit of the technical side of it. You know, it's again living through the principle of safety. The launch itself is timed. It's called an instantaneous launch window, and what we're really talking about is you have till that time, at that time, to launch. And a lot of that has to do when you're loading propellant at a certain temperature into the rockets to ensure rocket performance to get you to rendezvous with the space station. As that propellant warms up, you decrease or degrade the rocket's performance over a period of time. Additionally, another part of that aspect, it isn't just the weather at the Kennedy Space Center, right, at Launch Pad 39A where SpaceX was launching from. It's the weather that's occurring in the entire area, because you also have to look at recovery in case something goes wrong. We have to be able to recover folks. You have to be concerned with ground crews that are loading the propellant. There's a lot of safety concerns that go into it. There are 3 or 4 weather principles, rules that we have that would have been violated if we would have launched. And here's the interesting thing from a values or from an organizational perspective. Well, we are all disappointed it didn't go off. Not one person in NASA was like, oh, we should have launched. I have yet to hear that on any conversation inside our walls. It's just, hey, that's, you know, we've waited 10 years. We'll wait 3 more days till Saturday at 3:22 to hopefully get our next shot at it. And if it doesn't work on Saturday, we'll look at the next window, which I believe is Sunday. So it's, again, a demonstration of values.
Nice one, Bob. And you actually remind me of something that you spoke very vocally about, which was assuming positive intent. And it's certainly been my experience in dealing with all of your colleagues. Rory, welcome back. We have you now loud and clear, I think, do we?
I hope so.
I tell you, that's some technical team you have. Good to see you. So Bob mentioned competition and collaboration. And just zooming back to the question around the missionary mercenary effect of going from wearing the green shirt to representing the Lions, motivation, getting the best from that group. Yeah, you were just explaining that to us when I lost you.
Yeah, I think that ultimately, do we lose me again?
Just keep on going for 1 second. We should have you.
I think ultimately it comes down to the player, their mind, and you're dealing with players, countries, and putting them together, and it's that competitive that.
Rory, I'm afraid we're having the same thing. I'll come back to you in 2 minutes if that's okay. Heath, looking at the why, how, what principle, what happens between our people matters most. We had Margaret Heffernan, the TED Speaking author, on last week, and she talks a lot about kind of social capital and how we look to create that willingness to go further for each other, and how much friendship matters when the chips are down. We've all been in the same storm, but not necessarily in the same boat. How do you believe we can reconnect with deeper empathy and to allow our people rise for longer?
I want to pick up on, you mentioned the boats. It's something I've been thinking about, and sort of we're weathering the storm, but we're not all experiencing the storm in the same way. And I think if you continue with that metaphor or that analogy of the boat, what do you do when your boat is fine, you're seaworthy, and you come across another boat that is, bailing themselves out and trying to just, get to shore? What do? You stop and you help. You sacrifice, you give of your supplies and of your resources and your time and your energy so that other people can advance. So I think it really starts with this idea of selflessness, not selfishness, but selflessness. And we always define leadership, and this is how I think of leadership, is not about being in charge, but taking care of the people in your charge. And when you think about leadership in that way, you do not need a title, you do not need a position, you do not need a rank in order to be a leader. You can lead wherever you sit. You can lead wherever you stand. A child can be a leader within a family, even if you're willing to take care of your younger brother or your younger sister, or even be there for your parents when they need you. So I think it starts with this idea of selflessness, and then we continue it and deepen it with a sense of curiosity about other people's experience. And I think we saw this at the beginning of COVID. We saw this at the beginning of the coronavirus when we were sheltering in place. People were really putting themselves out there. What can I do? How can I help? They were volunteering. They were doing things that they weren't maybe even thinking they were capable of doing, but they were putting themselves out there. And I'm afraid, and this may sound a little controversial, that in the last few weeks, people have reverted back to what's in it for me? How can I win? What can I get? I'm not saying everybody, but there are plenty examples out there of people who have I'm kind of tired of this whole COVID thing. Let me go back to the way things were before. And we've seen things on the news, but to deepen the empathy, it starts with selflessness. You have to have a genuine openness and curiosity about other people's experience. Because I think it's easy for us to sort of stay inside of ourselves. How can we get outside of ourselves? And, it's about taking care of the people around you. I always ask people the same question during my talks and workshops is, what are you doing today that make the people around you better? And I think every single person on this planet has an opportunity to answer that question. It doesn't matter if you're head of a big company or you're a member of a family or a member of any kind of institution. If you're part of something, how are you making the people around you better? And I just want to do a quick shout out, Bob. I loved your phrase around, you said mission first, people always. I think that's just something that we need to all keep in our back pockets when it comes to empathy.
You mentioned for everyone on the planet, including those off the planet on the international space.
And yes,
we need to be inclusive here. We need to be inclusive here, Heath. We need to be inclusive. I'll just finish this before I go back to Rory. Heath, I mentioned at the outset the interconnectivity between, say, personal lives, family, society. Do you think we need to think differently about our professional purpose? Is it a personal thing, or does it look different given the context in which we find ourselves?
Yeah, in terms of our context, the context has shifted, right? So many people have been working from home for the last 8, 10, 12 weeks. And so they're starting to see, okay, what does remote working look like? What does being around my children look like? And I've heard from plenty of people who love it. And I've heard from an equal number of people who can't wait to get back to the office. But I think the question is a relevant question, which is, what is my why? What is my purpose? Because you use your why as fuel. You use your why, your purpose, to fuel you. You use it to make decisions. You use it to surround yourself with people who believe what you believe, because those who are clear about their why are able to get other people to follow them. So if you're living one why at work and another why at home, you're going to find yourself in some kind of dissonance. We always say, if you're living one purpose at work and one purpose at home, you're not showing up in one of those places. So we think of the why as a global purpose, a global cause. It's who you are at your best during the day, at night, on the weekend, during the week. It really shouldn't matter, with friends, with strangers, with colleagues. And so we're just urging people, as they're kind of working from home and the context has shifted, I'm hoping that people are doing a little bit of a re-examination of like, what is it that I actually believe in? What is it that I'm willing to fight for? What is it that inspires me to wake up in the morning? And I think a lot of people are asking themselves that question, because when the return to work when we start normalizing return to work, I think a lot of people are going to be like, do I want to go back to a place 10 hours? Do I not want to be around for my child's this or my children's? Like, it's a big question, I think. So if to wrap it up, to tap into our discretionary energy, I think we need to appreciate the fact that our why is a global concept for ourselves. It's at work, it's at home, it's on the weekend, it's during the week. It's something you can live into always.
Yeah, I think to be at our best when times are at their worst, full stop. Probably wraps that up. Thank you for that, Heath. Rory, third time is a charm, and I see you've got the headphones in. How are we sounding now?
Oh, I hope we're all right, are we?
I tell you, was it the question?
Just trying to avoid it, to be honest.
Well done. That's real agility, to avoid a question. So again, you're just about to explain to us just briefly about the difference between the Lions and the Irish.
Yeah, I think that ultimately the guys have talked all about purpose. Whenever you play rugby, you grew up playing, you want to play at the highest possible level, and the British and Irish Lions are the pinnacle. So to get that opportunity, you've a lot of hard work, you've had to put in, you've had to be lucky, and ultimately you get on that tour, and it's not enough just to be on the tour, because you're a competitive animal. You want to be playing your best rugby on the biggest stage, and that's what the Lions gives you. And that's why in such a short period of time, you can pull together the best players from 4 countries with a united purpose to go to New Zealand, South Africa, Australia, and win a test series. The balance of that is that ultimately you're dealing with guys that in their club are indispensable. At country level are probably the best players on the pitch. And then they come to a scenario where they're surrounded by their peers who are of the same, and not everyone can start. So you have to try to balance the guys that maybe aren't going to start, who are still fantastic players, who have still a massive role to prepare everyone else to be ready for that test series. And that is probably the hardest one, is to keep people on tour, so to speak.
And of all the teams you've played with, both provincial, club, national Lions, where do you think the kind of the social fabric or the collaboration or teaming was at its best, and where didn't it work so well?
I think ultimately the first thing you need is the right people. If you get the right players in an organization and they have a aligned goal and they want to get there, then that is the best teams I've been involved in. I have played in teams that probably have better individual players, but ultimately haven't been as successful because there's not the alignment. They think it's about them. It's not about the collective. And the best teams I've played in recognizes that it's the strengths and the collective coming together that forms this team, and that the winger that scores the tries, he gets the headlines, but he also acknowledges the work that maybe some of the front row do in the lead up to that to get the quick ball to allow them to score, and it's ultimately an organism that moves and is fluid, and everybody has mutual respect for each other.
I wanted names, and I wanted years, and I wanted specifics there, Rory, in terms of best and worst. But look, we won't get into it. You and I spoke last week, and we actually got speaking about the Michael Jordan documentary on Netflix. Are you watching it, guys? So Rory was a couple of episodes ahead of me, and I caught up with you since, right? And you explained the scenario where Michael Jordan's drive for results came at a cost, and that cost was at the cost of his relationships with his teammates. And I think that ran deep with him. It was certainly was the closest he came to crying, in fact, when he looked back and he heard it. Do you think, looking at your own history, Rory, was there ever a time where the kind of your personal pride got in the way of the collective purpose, or as your drive for performance or success, has it ever come at a cost, or how do you look back on your career?
I think top level sport is potentially a bit unique to other businesses in that there's almost a need that you need to say exactly how you're feeling at the time, and it flares up quite quickly and dies off quite quickly. So there's been times when, like, I remember we played for Ulster and there was a scrum half the week before had presumed the game was over. He'd kicked the ball into touch. The referee had went, not over yet, we'll play the line out. The next week we played in the European Cup, big away game for us. It was an important win, and we're a couple of points ahead, and the scrum half is there, standing over the ball, sort of asking the referee, taking forever. So probably not the right thing to do. I came up behind him and basically kicked him in the backside and told him to get the effing ball off the pitch. We need to win this game. And I think that spilled over off the pitch a little bit, because that person then presumed that I disliked him off the pitch because of the way I'd reacted on the pitch. And I think I saw that a bit with Michael Jordan in terms of the standards and how hard he pushed everyone on the court, that some people weren't able to differentiate between that's him pushing me because he needs to be the best he can be and he needs to drag me with him, versus the guy that's off the pitch, and I don't know what he's like off the court, but off the pitch I'm a lot more relaxed. I'd like to think I'm a lot less grumpy. But when you get to that moment where in a sporting context it feels like life or death at that one moment, you will do whatever it takes to win, and sometimes that spills over into a little bit of aggro with your teammates.
And also on yourself, like I was reading about this famous story, Rory, where it was against the All Blacks, where you broke an arm in a tackle. You held your arm, you regrouped, and you played on. Do you ever think, like, I know the cliche of putting your body on the line, like Bob played college football, American football, they've all helmets and pads, they barely get injured, you know what I mean? But in a real sport like rugby, like, you must look back and think, like, decisions you make where you back yourself to do it, where you're not at your best. I suppose an empty lantern can't provide any light. Like, do you think sometimes the personal drive gets in the way of the collective achievement?
I think sometimes you take yourself to a place where, and you get yourself ready to play when you're probably not, and you mentally convince yourself you're ready to play. And there is times you look back and you go, would the next guy in my position, fully fit, be a better prospect for the team? Probably. But you're in yourself and your competitive nature, you go, I want to play. I need to play in this, and that drives you. And I think the flip of that is, if you take that away from somebody, do they become the same athlete? Do they become the same competitor? And for me, there's also, when you get your best players on the pitch, it's almost a mental thing for the rest of the team. If you think who your best player is, if he's playing at 70%, the next guy might be potentially better as a player, but the knock-on effect to your team and the opposition team of not having your key player psychologically can be quite big and can actually offset.
We spoke about discretionary effort, and you touched on the on-pitch leadership piece there, Rory. Of all the coaches you've worked with, who got the best out of you, and why do you think so?
It was Joe Smith, and it's quite easily because he was the one that, two things, he showed me that the importance of the team and the collective, and that it wasn't about the headline grabbers, it was about everyone working, sacrificing to make the team unit a better unit. And he also showed us that repetition and what you do in training and practice matters in a game, and that you might train badly for a week and you'll get away with it maybe in a game, maybe the next game, but eventually over time these corners you cut or mistakes you made will manifest itself, and it ultimately manifests itself in the biggest games, in the most important moments, because that's when the pressure comes on, and that's when you ultimately go back to what is your innate response to that situation. So he really drove training, like would be on the pitch, shouting, putting pressure on you, and trying to replicate as much as possible what it was going to be like in the game at the weekend.
You remind me of a famous military quote around, you don't rise to the occasion, you rise to the level of training that you've put in. Thanks for that, Rory. I'll come back to you now in a few minutes. Bob, I'll come to you if I may. And sorry about the slagging of the American football. I see a comment here. I'm lucky there's an ocean in between us, which I am. But all the cliches around leadership, there's so many from NASA, aren't there? And you think of like Houston, we've got a problem, and like all these famous quotes that are quoted in leadership books and so on. What do you see? So you've been in the military, you've been in energy, and now in NASA. What do you see as being the kind of unique leadership qualities at NASA, Bob?
So I think there's some, we talked a little bit about it briefly, and I think we may have discussed this previously. You talk about, leadership having true concern for their employees. That can't be faked. It has to be genuine. It has to be authentic. You have to invest the time and the energy and the commitment to take care of your folks. I think that's absolutely critical. I think for the employees, they're engaged in the work, I think their engagement is their passion, the things that they're able to do. If there's one thing that's, very interesting about NASA specifically, there is an innate sense of purpose in a commitment or a desire or passion, however you want to say it, for solving problems, solving hard problems. I think that is just sort of key and core to who we are. It's something that you find in every employee at NASA. I think it's that bias for action. You talked a little bit about, and I've heard this, and I shudder a little bit when I hear this conversation about COVID-19, about, well, we're on a warlike footing. I'm not sure, having been there and done a little bit of that, you can't sustain that level of effort over a long period of time without breaking. If you're talking about we're going to attack this problem as if we were going to war, sort of a thing, I think there has to be greater understanding that that's a heck of a commitment as we're attacking these problems. You got to be all in. I agree. But there also should be recognition from an individual's perspective that it's not a sustainable tempo. It's not a sustainable sort of concept of action sort of going forward. And again, I think, Robbie, one of the most important things that we've talked about, again, is, believing in positive intent, believing people you're working with are doing the right thing for the right reasons at the right time, and how life-changing that can be.
But equally, I'm also reminded of an example we did recently, Bob, of crowdsourcing ideas and the process through which, like, everyone has a voice, and the crowdsourcing and the process, a robust process around like have a healthy conflict and challenge amongst people to arrive at a decision, it bypasses political impasse quite often and it makes the decision legitimate. And you often speak about just that in your team.
Yeah, so the concept of having the best idea win, and that can come from the most junior person that's involved with a project or program. I think you always have to be willing to examine the alternative, and having a constructive dissent process where someone says, "Hey, you know what? I don't agree with what we're doing, and let's have that conversation." And again, getting back to what Rory and what I think Heath have touched upon, sometimes ego gets in the way here. It's not about rank, it's not about position, it's about what's the right idea for this organization, what's the right idea for our country, what's the right idea for the world as we're furthering exploration, to the moon and beyond. So you really have to have a process that allows all voices to be heard. It can be draining sometimes, because you may say, you know what, it's pretty clear, I see the answer is A. But as you go through this process, and it's a fairly well-developed process, I think you could find maybe the right answer isn't A. Maybe it's something a little bit different. Again, I think it gets us also back to the conversation about risk. When we talk about Houston, we have a problem, right? And failure is not an option, the Gene Kranz quote, very famous. Well, I don't know if that's necessarily entirely true all the time, right? There are certain things that we do, like human exploration. Risk is a one-way door. You have to be right 100% of the time. We accept no deviation from these things. And you go through that door and you're committed, right? You launch a spacecraft, you are committed. It isn't like you're going to say, let's try again tomorrow. Well, maybe you do actually sometimes. There are other opportunities when you're evaluating risk from an organizational perspective where it's, hey, we can try and we can fail and we can learn from the failure. What isn't acceptable in those circumstances is not learning from the failure. If you learn from the failure and you can fix what you've been doing, you end up with a better process, program, procedure, whatever it might be going forward. I think there is value in that. I think there's great value in that.
If Julia is beyond you and listening to what you're speaking, I think you should look to Poach Keith's tech support guys. That they look to be doing a great job there. Thanks for that, Bob. Just working and building on the theme of leadership. Heath, I was reading extracts recently from Simon Sinek's book, The Infinite Game, and he argues that leaders with an infinite mindset outdo those with a finite mindset. How do you think that logic applies to the stage of the crisis or recovery we're in at the minute?
Yeah, so the premise is that, business is an infinite game. That there really is, when you think about it, whether you're NASA or whether it's, sports or anything else, that it's really an infinite game. It's an infinite game in the sense that, the rules are always changing, the players come and go, and there's no true finish line. I mean, even when you think about the Bulls, 6 championships, was that the finish line? Not really. If you listen to Michael at the end, he wanted to keep going. I mean, they ended early, so it ended up being a finite game. And so the idea in the infinite game is those leaders, those organizations, when you adopt this infinite mindset, when you think of yourself as a steward of an organization, as opposed to, I need to win and I need to figure out how to gain the most, and you start thinking about how can I deliver the most value, that's a game changer, because then you are now tapping into that discretionary energy. You are tapping into the imagination and the innovation, and you're in a situation, just as Bob described, it could be the lowest level employee who has the most brilliant idea. That's an infinite mindset where you have trusting teams, where you have a cause that you believe in, where you're willing to pivot and demonstrate what Simon calls existential flexibility. These are not unprecedented times. Organizations have faced challenges before. It's just all of us are facing this challenge at the same time, but in slightly different ways. And we see the infinite game as just a playbook, really, for COVID-19 and surviving and thriving and moving on. One of the things I like about the infinite game is that we can acknowledge that our lives are finite, but life is infinite. In other words, it keeps on going. And if you play by infinite rules, you ask yourself a different set of questions than if you play by finite rules. You play by finite rules and you're asking yourself, the main question is, what can I achieve? What can I gain? How much power can I accumulate? How much money can I make? What kind of position can I get to or rise to? But if you play by infinite rules, you're asking yourself a completely different set of questions. Now you're asking yourself, how can I make the people around me better? How can I improve the lives of the people that I interact with? What kind of difference am I making? And I think that's the game changer. And when you adopt that mindset, now you're really able to tap into the imagination and the innovation, really able to tap into everyone's discretionary energy. And over the long term, I can't promise the short term, but over the long term, those organizations, those leaders with that mindset are going to do better than those who don't.
But the long term heat is only a series of short terms, and clearly interconnected.
Absolutely. And I'll just add one thing, when we think of the infinite game, it's not one or the other. There are a series of finite games that we are playing inside of the infinite game. But life is an infinite game. Relationships are an infinite game. Marriage is an infinite game. Education, healthcare. There is going to be another side to COVID and to the coronavirus. There will be another side. The question is, are we going to emerge stronger? Are we going to emerge more resilient? Are we going to emerge feeling better about ourselves than when it started? That's the question. And I think the infinite mindset will help us get there.
Interesting. In so many ways, it reminds me, Rory, I'll come to you, of the World Cup and the game plan that you guys or the squad had. And I know afterwards you had obviously a very strong view in terms of expressing the leadership on the pitch, and it probably is into that infinite stroke finite. How would you look back at that infinite plan, and like what would you, or how would you like to have expressed your leadership in a more finite way during each game, Rory?
I think it's funny when Heath was speaking there, it's brought back so many memories of the Rugby World Cup, because like ultimately we got a scenario where the captain and the head coach were both finishing after the World Cup. And I don't subscribe necessarily to this whole, you can want it too much. But there was almost a little bit of that where we number one in the world going into the World Cup. Ireland had never got to a semi-final. This was a team of players that created history. We didn't need to worry about evolving over the next 2, 3, 4 years. This was about the end of October, lifting a golden trophy. And we almost got so focused on that we forgot about the process. And the previous 3 years had all been about moment by moment, within a week, within a training session, then into a game. And that, I wouldn't say went out the window. And it's only when you look back and reflect now, you realize that we probably got so caught up with who we were going to play in the quarterfinal that we maybe lost our focus a little bit against Japan and ended up on the wrong side of the draw. And there was all of that. And it's incredibly disappointing because you want your time again and you don't get it. But I think there was definitely aspects of that most definitely we became a little bit finite. This is our full stop. This is where we want to go. We know we're good enough to get there. And, let's just hang on for another 2 months.
I was thinking about it, even watching that documentary with the Bulls. There's so many parallels around that drive and that kind of shared destination stroke finite game, I suppose. That's just one of the many super stories in your book, Rory. Really, it's a credit to you. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. Guys, just one very quick question to each of you before we finish, just in a quick fire round. Our enduring purpose at Talent Summit is to enhance the working lives of people as the world of work changes. We've been doing this for 10 years and we've had 10 years of change in the last number of weeks. Any tips or suggestions you would share with our listeners to help enhance the working lives of our people? Bob?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think we have to dedicate time and effort to maintaining the relationships that we have within our structures. You might be working in a different way, but take the time out of a day to have a conversation that you would have had in person, to talk to people in a way that you remember they're going through something, see how they're doing, get beyond that first question, spend a little time and a little bit of effort. Remember that everyone's going through different things in different ways. Have some patience and have some compassion.
Thanks, Bob. Heath.
Yeah, I'm gonna hop on that train. Just a little, cut people some slack. I think we are all going through different things. We can have an up day and someone else is having a bad day. I remember, when I was younger, I had a friend who's, he was inviting me back we were going to go visit his family and we're going to hang out. And he said, just have soft eyes. And I said, what do you mean soft eyes? He says, don't be so judgy. Don't be so judgmental. Because I think that's what hard eyes gives us. It gives us this judgment. It gives us this narrow, like it has to be a certain way. And soft eyes is you open yourself up a little bit. You open your heart. You open your mind. And you maybe try to see things from other people's perspective, because you know what? Nobody has it all. And the grass always is greener on the other side. So, and which is not true, by the way. The grass is green where you water it. Cut people some slack. Soft eyes. It'll go a long way.
Well said, Heath. Thank you, Rory.
Yeah, I think it's very similar. I think it doesn't feel like it, but there are positives around this. And for me, it's been spending time with the family. I've been away so much. My eldest son will turn 10 next month, and to actually just spend time with them and almost feel like you're getting to know them again, and not being pulled from pillar to post to have to be here, to have to cut this time short. So we're trying to focus on some of the positives, and look, the rest is there. And yeah, we're enjoying family time.
The treadmill has slowed, Rory, hasn't it? And if we water the grass and make our own grass greener, as Heath said, it probably allows us to be a bit more compassionate, to Bob's point. Rory, Heath says that managers grow numbers and leaders make their people rise. Thank you for your 126 battles for Ireland and for making a nation rise. Heath, Bob mentioned positive intent. Thanks for doing that with us and the spirit in which you've collaborated. It's truly appreciated. And to round it out, Rory spoke about pride and purpose, Bob. We're very proud collaborators and with NASA, and your enduring purpose has gone a long way to help us realise our purpose in enhancing the working lives of our people and for all of our viewers and all of our community at Talent Summit. And for that, I want to thank the three of you and to wish all of you success in your own journey, and to wish enduring good health to you and yours. Thank you for joining us, guys. That was really, really insightful and very fascinating.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Rob, for putting this together. Just fantastic. And just a shout out to Sigmar, just an incredible organization. Everything's been fantastic. There, I said it. Thank you, guys.
10 out of 10.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rory. Thanks, Bob. To all of you, join us next week, where we'll be exploring reworking work with the global HR powerhouse and good friend Paddy McCord, who's the author and TED speaker and the former CTO of Netflix and the co-creator of the Netflix culture deck. We'll be looking at building a culture of freedom and responsibility. Until then, keep well. Thank you.